The re-emergence of the Mercedes Formula One team as a force to be reckoned with has been one of the standout stories of not only the 2024 F1 season, having picked up back-to-back wins with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton across the last two events with the W13, but also of the entire ground effect era of F1. The turnaround has been remarkable to say the least. So how have the team managed to turn it around in such a short space of time this season? Well, to fully understand as well as appreciate what Mercedes have done, we have to travel back in time to the beginning of the ground effect era in 2022 to fully understand all the issues and problems the team faced. And that all starts with the Mercedes W13. At the beginning of 2022, the morale within the team was secretly sky high regarding their chances of continuing their dominance within the sport, even after such a drastic change to the technical regulations. The dawn of a new era of F1 was all but upon us, and the team believed that they had achieved a eureka moment within this new set of regulations, much in the same way that they had with the double diffuser back in 2009. And of course, that was their well-documented creation of the W13's duly dubbed zero-pod concept. A concept which to the naked eye looked like an F1 car without the traditional side pods that has always been used in the series since the start of the championship. The data in terms of downforce and load points that they found from this concept was unlike any other from all the other concepts that they'd run through their simulations up until that point. And unbeknown to the team at the time, this was the beginning of their ground effect troubles, but also the first of many problems which would plague them with countless sleepless nights over the next 2.5 seasons. And that problem, of course, was the data through their simulations. CFD and wind tunnel could not accurately predict the insane levels of porpoising that the team experienced during pre-season testing and the entire 2022 F1 season. And the problem with the W13 was that the team had set the optimum operating window, i.e. in this situation the ride height, far too low to the ground to reach and achieve maximum peak downforce levels that the car could utilize in. And this then of course brought on the porpoising and the heavy severe bouncing at that particular ride height level. Of course, this left the team scratching their heads over two particular points. The more pressing matter was of course how to solve this particular phenomenon of porpoising the drivers were experiencing, and worryingly leaving their two drivers with severe headaches and back pains across the race weekends. And secondly, why was this not showing up in all of the data when they first conceptualized the zero-pod design for the W13? The bouncing was so bad, not only through the corners but even on the straights, that the team finally gave in and raised the ride height of the W13 for the remainder of the season. This coincided with an upgrade at the Spanish Grand Prix. Now, unfortunately for the team, with them having designed the zero-pod concept around a certain ride height to get peak performance in terms of downforce, this increase in ride height left the team losing over 90 points of downforce that season. And that's not the optimum way to run a F1 car in now, is it? And with that, the 2022 Formula One season was essentially a write-off in terms of fighting for either championships. But they would go on to pick up an ill-fated victory at the Brazilian Grand Prix through George Russell's maiden win in Formula One towards the end of the season. This would lead the team to stick with the zero-pod design for the following season. And did they live to regret that? 2023 rolls around and the Mercedes outfit unveiled the W14, once again with the zero-pod concept still intact. But another issue came into play for that particular season that the team needed to decide what would be the right course of action to undertake with their W14. with the FIA deciding to enforce raising of the floor edges by 15mm that season to eliminate the grid-wide porpoising from the previous season. It left the team with a hard decision to make. One that was particularly difficult for this team to make considering all the problems raised by last season, by setting the aero platform with last year's W13 too low to the floor in order to extract maximum levels of downforce. And this is a topic James Allison spoke at great lengths about between the 2023 and 2024 Formula 1 season. As Allison explained, there is a big debate internally. Should we cash in that 15mm and drop the car down? Operate in a window that's 15mm smaller because the cars will be less bouncy inherently? Or should we do more of what has done us well over the course of the previous year, which is force ourselves to keep looking for downforce where it's difficult, higher up? The debate raged internally for a while, and the logic was sort of like this. It's very hard to predict, because the tools that we can use are not especially good for this, where bouncing is going to be incurred. It's much harder to back yourself out of having driven off the end of a cliff and finding yourself bouncing than it is to be too high, not bouncing, and then lower yourself towards it. Mercedes unfortunately took the conservative approach with this particular conundrum and went with increasing the ride height for the initial design concept of the W14, giving away peak performance with not lowering the car to the lowest it could be in terms of ride height. And as it turns out, Allison went on to say we were too cautious. It was possible to cash in the 15mm. We would have been better placing our chips on that part of the roulette wheel, and we would have got much sooner to the sort of performance we were at the end of the 2023 season. So instead of having the peak performance being extracted from having the ride height of the car as low to the ground as possible, which is what they did with the W13. The W14 now was based around having the peak performance of downforce much higher up in terms of ride height. And this left the team with copious amounts of downforce points and load points left on the table to try to extract across the remainder of the 2023 F1 season. And the team began to do so at the Monaco Grand Prix, when they introduced a conceptual change in terms of the overall look and philosophy of the W14, which coincided with the introduction of the downwash side pod concept. Now, a lot of attention was placed on the removal of the dubbed zero pods, but the team and Allison have always maintained that the side pods were not a major factor in why the cars were not quick. And interestingly, Allison at the time revealed that this change in philosophy actually hurt the car's performance that weekend and weekends after that in the short term. But it wouldn't take the team long to claw back those 0.2 of a second they lost with their Monaco package. And for the rest of the season, the team continued to make strides towards the front of the grid, with notable upgrades to the W14's floor at the Circuit of the Americas. So for the first 2 seasons of the ground effect era, Mercedes had miscalculated the level in which to operate from in terms of peak downforce, and time and patience was running mightily thin with team principal Toto Wolff, stating the car didn't deserve to win a race that season. The choice of not setting the ride height level as low as possible had left the team on the back foot once more for this season. But the team had quietly been undertaking and learning all of their lessons, and were striving to make sure they made the correct choices with their next car, the W15. And with the W15, the Mercedes outfit made 2 key but major changes when it comes to the conception, design and build that we saw at the beginning of the season. Number 1 was of course making sure they utilized the maximum amount of ride height in terms of lowering the W15 to the floor as near as possible. Second to that, they also included the downwash side pod concept that Red Bull and many other teams have been utilising throughout the ground effect era, now coming in line with every major F1 outfit. And of course, something that I've not spoken about yet is the cockpit position has been installed further back within the chassis of the W15, so as though it's not leaning on the front tyre anywhere near as much as it did with its predecessor, the W14. And with this all in place, Mercedes had a stable base, a correct base if you will, from which to develop into the car that they have now at the midway point of the Formula 1 2024 season. The team had taken everything that they had learned over the past 2 disastrous seasons and righted all the wrongs that they had within the W13 and W14. But of course, this doesn't mean that it was going to be a walk in the park for the team for the 2024 Formula 1 season. Oh no, things with this team in this ground effect era just don't seem to work like that. Essentially, what Mercedes found earlier in the season is that they couldn't set the car up kind of in a balanced operating window for all the speed ranges of corners you would find at a given circuit. So if there was high and low speed corners, if you set the car up more towards one of those, the car would have a huge amount of issues in the opposite end or opposite direction. So for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix weekend, the team went more with a setup around the race and not the high-speed nature of that particular circuit. And this culminated with the team seeing through the race situation when Hamilton was facing Norris that in Sector 1 alone, the W15 was losing over a second per lap in that sector to the MCL38. And that's because the operating window that the Mercedes car at that point in time was in wasn't able to have a good setup between low speed and high speed corners, and the car as a result was bouncing up and down like a yo-yo. And they needed to make changes and modifications to not only the floor but of course suspension settings. And thankfully for them, they've finally begun to get on top of that. And this all started at the Miami Grand Prix when they introduced a brand new floor. And for the subsequent Grand Prix weekends, all the way up until last weekend at Silverstone, they had updates regularly every weekend. And this culminated with Lewis Hamilton's victory at that event based on pure merit, unlike George Russell's win the previous weekend in Austria after the leading two collided and took each other out of the race victory. And the major breakthrough has come from a brand new suspension design first introduced at the Austrian Grand Prix weekend. And this coincided with a vanity panel on the nose of the W15. And this is what the team were trying to achieve with that. And to understand the changes made, you have to understand the front suspension layout on ground effect era F1 cars. So here you can see the spring and damper in red, the rocker in silver, another damper in yellow, and the roll bar in blue. With Mercedes' current setup of a spring arrangement, it's one that is almost unilaterally agreed as being the best route taken for the design of the heave damper. And the Mercedes team is no different in this respect, as it too uses the method as a means to help control the vertical displacement of the chassis, and it is this component that has been upgraded or replaced at the Austrian Grand Prix that has resulted in the need of this vanity panel. The new bigger, more powerful horizontal damper at the front gives a more stable aero platform, allows more exploitation of the much improved flow from the front wing introduced at Monaco, and of course, most importantly of all, it allows the W15 to further neutralize the stresses placed on the chassis with softer settings that are far more capable of limiting the harmful hopping or bouncing, if you will, that has plagued the drivers much earlier in this season and of course over the previous two. And after all of the trials and tribulations of the 2022 and 2023 season, Mercedes have come out the other side of this dark and depressing era within their sporting achievements in Formula One. And I feel now they're in the position in which to continuously fight for pole positions and race victories. And this has been a remarkable turnaround for a team which did not look like they had a prayer in being able to overcome all the obstacles in which they had been faced with across the last 2.5 seasons. But that has all changed, and it's testament to all the hard work that the team have put in both at Brackley and Brixworth. This is an undertaking which has taken a huge amount out of them mentally and physically, and now they will look to reap the benefits for the remainder of the season with victory after victory. Well, that's the video, guys. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like, subscribe if you're new here, comment down below anything within this video, and I will catch you all with another Formula One video later in the week.